Hey and welcome back. This is part 3 of 4, and in this video series I explain how to take a basic beginner loop and in 8 steps turn it into a fire intermediate beat. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, I'd suggest you watch those first. The links are down in the description and up top here. Today we're going to get real deep into number 6, but wait, I can already hear some of you saying, what is this? Every video gets less and less. Trust me, 6 is long and specific. Just look at the length of this video. I could have easily made it to 2 or 3 different sections if it didn't all work so well together. So, without further ado, now that brings us to number 6, which is a couple things. Sections and structure, arrangement, section-specific sounds, and transitions. Let's start here. The beginner beat should be pretty clear just from looking at it. It's got some verses and it's got some choruses. Not even really a simple intro. The intermediate, on the other hand, is a bit more specific. It goes from an intro to a chorus to a verse that's constantly changing and then to an outro. Clearly, it's got more different sections and a more thought-out structure. That's because having different sections helps the beat move forward, because it actually always is. It also just makes the song more interesting and better if done right. The great thing about it as well is that arrangement is relatively simple for rap beats. Most of it is just moving parts of the loop around, though not everything. We'll get to both of those in this section. So, real question. How do you get a loop to have different sections so that it gives the beat a structure? Arrangement, right? I'm going to go ahead and assume that isn't news to you because that's what the beginner learns. The question you've come to me is, what does arrangement look like as an intermediate? I'm glad you asked because this is where it gets interesting. It's a big picture point. The core idea of what's going on here is this. In the beginner beat, basically all the arrangements were limited to the question, how can I make it always be different so that it doesn't get boring? In the intermediate beat, although that's still true and important, the questions become a little more specific. Now the question is, how can I make changes that make the path that this beat takes more clear? And I hope you notice the trend of basically all the improvements here. Everything I add, do, change, or take away from beginner to intermediate is about direction and definition. The more you give a beat direction, the more the beat starts to form a path that takes you through its story. The more you can give a beat definition, the more you start to deeply and clearly feel and understand that path. Imagine if I told you there's some dirt road that runs through the woods. Or instead I said, there's a dirt road that's been made flat by nearly 2 decades of foot traffic by some now newlywed couple as they look at the change of green, gray, and brown on the beach and pine trees and how it's an almost intoxicating smear of colors in midsummer when the pink, yellow, white, and purple flowers bloom. Completely different paths, right? The path in itself is the direction, the big picture of the beat. What sections does the beat have? What's the chord progression? What made emotion? High energy or low energy? Whereas the path in its details is the definition. Chord voicing, sound selection, sudden changes, noticeable transitions, frills and decorations, stuff like that. At that point, the sky and you is the limit. How strong, how clear, and how specific can you make that story? In a nutshell, that's all art and all music and the pathway from beginner to master and beyond. To bring it back to the beat, the chords follow the exact same thinking. Should I change the chord progression? Direction. What types of chord patterns or chord sounds fit best where? Definition. These are some common questions that an intermediate might have about the beat at hand, where the correct answer is whatever serves the beat best. Looking at the beginner beat, the chord progression here didn't change as I turned it into the intermediate. In this case, all the questions I had to do with definition. More specifically, chord patterns and their variations, sound selections and layers, and chord voicings. And it's the exact same thinking for the melodies as well. So with that in mind, let's move forward with melodies as our example. Do you understand that when you change a melody, it'll automatically and noticeably change the face of a section? That's what happens here. Notice how the vibe was different, even if only a little? Well, you can work with that. You just have to make sure the melody or chord pattern or whatever fits the vibe, which you can do just fine by ear. From there, all you gotta do is take a step back and look at the whole beat that way. Here's another example. Listen to the part I got highlighted and I'll explain after. But pay special attention to how the beat changes and what those changes do for the beat. this is all direction. What I did was here, I took out the drums and the verse melody. But by doing that, it put the really airy chord sounds way into the focus. Because of the sounds that are left, those are the ones that really grab at your attention most. So the question is, does that move the vibe forward in the right way? Well, the idea for the verse, in terms of direction, was to have it constantly build energy. The idea for measure 33, in terms of definition, was to slow the beat down a little bit before the outro without really losing much energy or any if possible. Now you tell me if that works. I want to emphasize that direction and definition are good concepts, but they're not a perfect science. They work, so use them to flesh out your thinking and understanding, but aim for the day where you don't need them anymore. Now the last thing about arrangement is this. I made lots of variations on the established patterns to help match the flow and energy of the beat as it went through its sections. For example, as you can see here and here, there's 5 different versions of basically the same essential guitar pattern, all definition. Some changes or variations will be more noticeable and some will be tiny. Now let's get to section-specific sounds, and it's still the exact same thinking. I hope you don't get sick of these 2 words by the end of this. I chose these sounds in these spots because they either strengthen the vibe in the mood that was needed, that's direction, because they help smooth the transition between the vibe in 2 sections, or simply because a single sound needed some reinforcement to sound good in full. Those 2 are definition. For the record, as you may have heard, I'm not necessarily always thinking about these things as I'm producing. Sometimes I do, sometimes I get to the same answer without it. But that said, the first of the section-specific sounds are these, the melodies. And I didn't specifically choose these, they just sounded right. You know how it goes. And then I added this Rhodes to the outro, and that sound I did actually choose specifically because I knew it would give the vibe a nice edge here. That's definition. Looking at the beginner beat, as you may expect, there are none. Except maybe you could say the hook melody. So now that brings us to the last thing in section 6, which is transitions. And essentially, there's a transition every 8 bars because something happens every 8 bars. That said, some of the smaller transitions are just like one blip, like one tiny little something, because then and there, that's enough. But if you compare that to the beginner beat, in here there are none. Except for maybe the transition-y thing built into the accent claps and the drums. But it's that lack of real transitions that makes the beginner beat sound so sudden when it switches sections. Now granted, I exaggerated the lack of smoothing in the beginner beat so that you can clearly hear what it sounds like when a transition is needed. In a good beginner beat, you'll find that a lot, but generally it'll be much less obvious. The flip side of this point is that it's because of the transitions that the sections of the intermediate here flow so well, and why the path isn't broken every time we move to a new section. The other part to this is that the sections are written so that they already naturally flow decently well into each other. Another part of what you learn as an intermediate is to write clean section endings. Clean enough at least so that with a proper transition, everything will flow. So that's why and when transitions are needed, but in terms of actually making that transition, that's in the next section. But for now, let's cut to break here. I mean, that's already a lot. I'm almost done editing the last video unless you're watching this way into the future. If that's the case, I'll figure out how to put the video here and the link will be down in the description. As always, if you want to make music better, better make music. See you soon.